The shimmering blue water of Elena Dawson's backyard pool turned a sickly shade of crimson at precisely 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in June. She wouldn't discover this act of vandalism for another 5 hours, but the security camera mounted discreetly under her back porch eave captured the entire incident. A tall figure in dark clothing, face obscured by a baseball cap, methodically emptying 5-gallon buckets of red paint into her prize infinity pool, the centerpiece of the home she worked 15 years to afford. Jesus Christ. Elena gasped the next morning, coffee mugs slipping from her fingers and shattering on the limestone patio as she stared in horror from her kitchen doorway. The rising sun illuminated what looked like a crime scene. Thick ribbons of crimson swirling through the once crystal water, the automatic pool cleaner drowned in pavement, floating lifelessly in the center. She knew immediately who was responsible. 2 days earlier, Elena had finally done what her friends had been urging her to do for months. She had kicked Marcus Harmon out of her house and her life. After 8 months of dating, 3 months of him practically living with her, and 6 weeks of increasingly concerning behavior, she'd reached her breaking point. What had started as a charming whirlwind romance had devolved into something darker, more possessive. "You're overreacting," Marcus had insisted when she asked him to leave. His voice had remained eerily calm, but his eyes had flashed with something that sent a chill down her spine. "We can work this out. We always do." "Not this time," Elena had replied, standing her ground despite the tremor in her hands. "I need you to take your things and go. Today." He'd left without another word, methodically packing his belongings into 2 duffel bags. The silence had been more unsettling than shouting would have been. No pleas, no arguments, just the weight of unspoken threats hanging in the air between them. Now, as Elena circled her ruined pool, a $75,000 investment she'd made following her divorce 3 years ago, she felt a strange mixture of vindication and terror. Vindication that her instincts about Marcus had been right all along, terror at how quickly he'd escalated to revenge. Her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. A text message from an unknown number. Asterisk, hope you like the new color scheme. Red always was more your style than blue asterisk. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. He'd never threatened her explicitly during their relationship, but there had been moments. Comments about her female friends, questions about her whereabouts that seemed just a touch too insistent, a tendency to surprise her at work that had slowly accumulated like storm clouds on the horizon. "Mom." A young police officer stood in her garden pathway, notepad in hand. Elena hadn't even heard the patrol car arrive. "I'm Officer Reyes. Your security company called us about a property damage report." Elena nodded, relieved that her home security system had automatically alerted the monitoring service. She handed the officer her phone with the text message displayed. "I know who did this," she said firmly, "and I'm afraid this is just the beginning." The officer glanced from the ruined pool to the message, his expression transitioning from routine disinterest to focused concern. "Tell me everything," he said, clicking his pen. "And let's start with who you think would have reason to do something like this." As Elena began recounting the collapse of her relationship with Marcus, the neighbor directly behind her property peeked over the fence, smartphone raised to capture images of the crimson pool. Elena felt exposed, vulnerable, unaware that what had begun as a private dispute was about to become the neighborhood's most riveting drama, with consequences none of them could predict. 3 days after the pool incident, Elena stood in her kitchen watching a team of specialists in chemical-resistant coveralls working to salvage what they could of her once pristine infinity pool. The estimate for complete restoration had come in at just over $18,000. The special coating had been damaged beyond repair by the industrial-grade paint Marcus had used. "You should file a restraining order," said Vivian, Elena's sister, who had driven over from 2 towns away after hearing what happened. "This isn't just petty revenge, Elena. This is psychotic behavior." "The police say they can't do much without more evidence," Elena replied, absently stirring her untouched tea. "The security footage is graining at night, and he wore a hat. They know it's him, I know it's him, but technically there's insufficient proof to charge him." What Elena hadn't told her sister was that Marcus had been circling her street in his black Audi multiple times a day. She'd spotted him twice yesterday alone, driving slowly past her house, windows tinted too dark to see his face clearly. Each time she called the non-emergency police line. Each time, by the time an officer arrived, Marcus was gone. "Well, at least your neighbor Calvin has been helpful," Vivian offered, nodding toward the house next door. "Having a retired detective living next to you must provide some comfort." Calvin Mercer had indeed been unexpectedly supportive. The 68-year-old widower had initially been the neighborhood's resident curmudgeon when Elena moved in 3 years ago. He complained about her landscapers being too loud and once left a passive-aggressive note about her garbage cans being visible from the street. But the morning after the pool incident, he'd appeared at her door with a Ring doorbell camera still in its packaging. "Got an extra one of these for my son last Christmas," he'd explained gruffly. "Never bothered to install it. Figured you might need it more than me right now. The sound of a truck engine drew Elena's attention back to the present. Through her kitchen window, she watched as Calvin emerged from his garage carrying what appeared to be planks of wood. What on earth is he doing now? Vivian wondered aloud. They soon got their answer. Calvin began methodically reinforcing the shared fence between their properties, adding height with the wooden planks and installing motion sensor floodlights along the top. I'm going to thank him, Elena said decisively, heading for the back door. As she approached, Calvin looked up from his work, wiping sweat from his brow. Thought I'd shore up this side, he explained without preamble. Saw your ex driving by again this morning while you were talking to the pool guys. Didn't like the look on his face. Elena felt a chill despite the warm June air. You saw Marcus? Why didn't you tell me? Didn't want to worry you more than necessary, Calvin replied, hammering another nail with surprising vigor for his age. But I called that Officer Reyes and gave him the license plate number. Also told him your ex seemed to be casing the place. Thank you, Elena said, genuinely touched by her neighbor's concern. I don't know why you're going to all this trouble for me. Calvin's weathered face softened slightly. My Catherine, my late wife, she had a stalker before we met. Back when she was teaching at the community college. Couldn't take rejection, started following her, leaving gifts on her doorstep. He shook his head at the memory. System failed her completely. Had to handle it ourselves in the end. Before Elena could ask what he meant by handling it, her phone chimed with a text notification. Her stomach dropped as she saw it was from the same unknown number as before. Asterisk read was just the beginning. Wait until you see what black will do to your pretty White House. Midnight tonight. Be ready, asterisk. She showed the message to Calvin, whose expression hardened as he read it. Without a word, he walked to his truck, pulled out a small duffel bag, and handed it to Elena. Home security kit, he explained. Motion sensors for every entrance, and I'll be on my deck tonight with a pair of night vision binoculars and the police on speed dial. As Elena walked back to her house, clutching the security kit, she noticed several neighbors had emerged onto their front lawns, watching the pool crew work. Mrs. Abernathy from across the street was openly filming with her iPad. 2 doors down, the Chen family's teenage son was pointing his drone toward Elena's backyard. What had begun as a private violation was morphing into a neighborhood spectacle. Elena felt herself burning with a mixture of humiliation and anger, not just at Marcus, but at the voyeuristic interest of people she'd exchanged nothing more than casual waves with for years. Midnight came and went without incident. Elena, who had dozed fitfully in a living room chair positioned to face the front door, awoke at 3:17 a.m. to the harsh buzz of her phone vibrating against the wooden coffee table. Disoriented, she fumbled for it in the dark, expecting another threatening message from Marcus. Instead, it was a text from Calvin. Asterisk, check your backyard. Now, asterisk. Heart pounding, Elena moved to her kitchen window. The motion-activated floodlights Calvin had installed along their shared fence were blazing, illuminating her yard in harsh white light. Nothing seemed amiss at first glance. No black paint splashed across her house as Marcus had threatened. Then she saw it. The gate to her pool equipment had been forced open. Even from this distance, she could see the padlock hanging broken. Her phone buzzed again. Asterisk called the police. Stay inside, asterisk. Elena's immediate instinct was to check her pool, which had been drained that afternoon in preparation for resurfacing. Moving to her back door, she flipped on the patio lights and peered through the glass. The pool itself looked untouched, its empty basin a pale gray hollow in the ground. The distant wail of police sirens broke the pre-dawn silence. As they grew louder, the floodlights suddenly caught movement near her garden shed. A dark figure bolted across the yard toward the rear fence, the one separating her property from the Thompsons' house behind her. Stop right there. Calvin's commanding voice rang out from his second-floor deck. The figure froze momentarily, then sprinted with renewed urgency. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. A sudden explosion of water erupted from the ground near the fleeing figure. Then another and another, geysers shooting up 6 feet high as the person zigzagged across her lawn. Elena realized with astonishment that her underground sprinkler system had been activated, strategically turning on and off in sections to herd the intruder away from the fence and back toward the center of the yard. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of her house. As officers poured into her backyard, the intruder, thoroughly soaked and disoriented, slipped on the wet grass and fell hard. Don't move, an officer shouted, weapon drawn. Hands where I can see them. The floodlights illuminated the scene with theatrical clarity as the figure slowly raised their hands. It wasn't Marcus. It was Darren Thompson, her neighbor from the house directly behind hers. The same neighbor who had been eagerly photographing her ruined pool 3 days earlier. What the hell? Elena whispered, watching through the kitchen window as officers handcuffed Darren. Calvin appeared at her side door a moment later, a tablet in his hands. "You'll want to see this," he said grimly. "I've been monitoring the yard with thermal cameras. Caught the whole thing." He swiped through a series of images. Darren Thompson climbing over the back fence, attempting to access her pool equipment shed, and then, most disturbingly, pouring something into the filtration system from a small bottle before the sprinklers activated. "I don't understand," Elena said, bewildered. "Darren? He and his wife bought that house just 6 months ago. I've barely exchanged 10 words with him. Why would he?" She was interrupted by Officer Reyes at her front door. "Ms. Dawson, we need to ask you some questions, and you might want to sit down for this." Inside, Reyes explained that Darren Thompson had confessed almost immediately. Says your ex-boyfriend paid him $2,000 to pour industrial drain cleaner into your pool's plumbing system. Would have destroyed the entire infrastructure, pipes, pumps, everything. Another $20,000 in damage, minimum. "But why would Darren agree to do that?" Elena asked, struggling to process this bizarre turn of events. "Money, primarily," Reyes replied. "But there's more. Thompson claims Marcus Harmon has been coordinating with several neighbors. Apparently, Harmon has been telling people you're a neighborhood menace at hosting loud parties, planning to convert your home into a multi-unit rental against HOA regulations, all sorts of fabricated violations." Elena sat stunned as the officer continued. "Thompson's wife showed us text messages where Harmon created a group chat with 6 households surrounding your property. He's been systematically turning them against you for weeks." "Weeks? Well, we only broke up 5 days ago," Elena protested. "Exactly," Calvin interjected. "He was laying groundwork before you even kicked him out, planning for revenge before you'd actually done anything." 2 weeks passed without any sign of Marcus Harmon. The police had flagged his credit cards, monitored his bank accounts, and circulated his photo to law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Nothing. It was as if he had evaporated. For Elena, these weeks had transformed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her once private home had become a fortress under constant surveillance, not just from the sophisticated security system Calvin had helped her install, but from the hyper-vigilant eyes of neighbors determined to make amends for their earlier betrayal. The Chens had programmed their son's drone to make regular sweeps around her property perimeter. Mrs. Abernathy, a retired school teacher with insomnia, had appointed herself the midnight to 4 a.m. neighborhood watch captain, and could be seen patrolling the sidewalk with her massive German shepherd at all hours. The Thompsons had placed their house on the market, unable to face the community after Darren's arrest and subsequent deal with prosecutors to testify against Marcus. "It's like living in a reality show I never auditioned for," Elena told her sister during their daily check-in call. "I can't even go for a run without someone texting me to ask if I'm okay because I look stressed when I stretched at the corner." "Better overprotected than underprotected," Vivian replied pragmatically. "Have you given any more thought to my offer? The guest house is yours for as long as you need it." Elena had considered moving temporarily to her sister's property in the countryside, but something kept her rooted to her home. Perhaps it was stubborn defiance, or maybe the creeping suspicion that running away would only delay the inevitable confrontation with Marcus. "I can't live my life in hiding," she said firmly. "Besides, the pool reconstruction starts tomorrow." She had decided, against the advice of practically everyone, to not only repair her pool, but to completely redesign it. The new plans called for a deeper end, natural stone surrounds instead of concrete, and a miniature waterfall feature that would cascade over imported blue granite. The price tag had nearly doubled, but her insurance had covered the original damage, and Elena viewed the extravagant upgrade as a statement, a declaration that she would not merely survive Marcus' attempts to destroy what she loved, but would emerge with something even more beautiful. The reconstruction crew arrived early the next morning. By noon, the old pool had been completely demolished, leaving a jagged cavity in her backyard significantly larger than before. Elena stood at her kitchen window, watching the organized chaos of workers and machinery, when her doorbell rang. It was Calvin, looking more troubled than usual. "Just got off the phone with my son," he said without preamble. "He works cybersecurity for the state, as you know. Been helping me monitor some things informally." Elena's stomach tightened. "And?" "Marcus Harmon closed all of his bank accounts yesterday. Emptied them completely. He's running," Elena said, feeling a surge of relief that quickly evaporated as she registered Calvin's expression. "People running don't usually convert everything to cash and then return to the area," Calvin said grimly. "My son traced a login to his email account. The IP address came from the public library downtown 3 hours ago." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "He's back." "Never left, most likely," Calvin corrected. "Been laying low, watching, waiting." As if on cue, Elena's phone chimed with an incoming email. The sender's address was unfamiliar, but the subject line turned her blood to ice. Asterisk, "Your new pool design looks ambitious. Shame about the bedrock issue, asterisk." How would he know about? She began, then stopped as realization dawned. The contractor's website. They uploaded the design renderings to my customer portal yesterday. Calvin was already on his phone calling Officer Reyes. "We need a patrol car here immediately," he said tersely. "And someone should check the construction site." Elena ran to her backyard. The workers were on their lunch break, clustered under a tree at the far end of her property, sandwiches and thermoses in hand. The excavated pool site lay momentarily abandoned, its raw edges and exposed earth vulnerable. She scanned the deep pit where her pool had been, looking for anything unusual. Nothing seemed immediately wrong, but she was hardly a construction expert. What had Marcus meant about a bedrock issue? Officer Reyes arrived within minutes, accompanied by a second patrol car. As they approached the pool excavation, one of the construction workers jogged over. "Ma'am, did you authorize someone to inspect the site this morning?" he asked, brow furrowed in confusion. "No," Elena replied, her heart rate accelerating. "Why?" Guy in a reflective vest and hard hat was measuring the north corner about an hour ago. 27 minutes after the neighborhood plunged into darkness, Elena heard it, a sound so faint it might have been imagination. A soft scrape against the exterior of Calvin's house, like someone testing the sturdiness of a window frame. She and Calvin had taken refuge in his safe room, the reinforced steel door securely bolted from inside. The small space was illuminated only by the dim red glow of emergency lighting powered by batteries Calvin had wisely stored inside the room itself. "Northeast corner," Calvin whispered, pointing to one of 6 small monitors mounted on the wall. The screens displayed grainy thermal imaging of the house's perimeter, another precaution that, until tonight, had seemed excessive. Movement. On the screen, a heat signature moved methodically along the side of the house, pausing at each window. Elena watched, transfixed, as the figure reached the back door and knelt before it. The thermal imaging couldn't show details, but the posture suggested someone picking a lock. Calvin reached for his phone to alert the police, then cursed quietly. No signal. He must have some kind of jammer. Outside, they could hear the distant shouts of officers coordinating their search, the occasional sweep of a helicopter spotlight passing overhead. Help was out there, but effectively blocked by the communications blackout Marcus had engineered. "How long before they check here?" Elena whispered. "Too long," Calvin replied grimly, watching as the heat signature on the monitor disappeared from the back door. "He's inside." For 5 excruciating minutes, they tracked the intruder's progress through Calvin's house. Room by room, methodical and unhurried, Marcus moved closer to their hiding place. Elena clutched the taser Calvin had given her, its small weight somehow inadequate against the calculated malevolence that had orchestrated explosives, neighborhood manipulation, and a widespread power outage, all for revenge against a woman who had simply asked him to leave. "He won't find us," Calvin assured her, though his expression betrayed doubt. "This room isn't on any house plans. I had it built off the record." But as the heat signature approached the hallway leading to their sanctuary, it paused. Then, inexplicably, it moved directly toward the hidden door, not with the hesitation of someone searching, but with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where to go. How could he possibly? Calvin began, then stopped as horrifying realization dawned. The thermal cameras. They work both ways. If he has similar equipment, the safe room's exterior would glow like a beacon on thermal imaging, their body heat trapped within the insulated walls, creating a distinctive signature to anyone with the right technology. A soft knock at the door froze them both. "Elena." Marcus's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I know you're in there. With your knight in shining armor, no doubt." Neither of them responded. "Quite the setup old Calvin has here," Marcus continued. "Did he tell you about his past? Why a retired detective would need a military-grade safe room and thermal imaging? Interesting reading in his personnel files. Very interesting." Calvin's jaw tightened, but he maintained his silence. "This door is impressive. Swedish steel, reinforced hinges, 6-point locking system." A pause. "Would take hours to breach directly. Fortunately, I don't need to." The sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor outside made Elena's skin crawl. "Carbon dioxide tanks from the garage," Marcus explained, his voice still eerily pleasant. "Calvin's welding hobby comes in handy. These tanks, when emptied into a sealed room approximately this size, will displace enough oxygen to cause unconsciousness in about 15 minutes. Death follows shortly after." As if to punctuate his words, they heard the distinctive hiss of gas. "He's bluffing," Calvin whispered, though uncertainty clouded his eyes. "The room is sealed, but there's an emergency ventilation system." He moved to a panel on the wall and flipped a switch. Nothing happened. "Looking for this?" Marcus called, as if reading their minds. The ventilation control unit was mounted on the exterior wall. Sloppy design, really. Calvin's face paled in the red emergency light. He crossed to a cabinet and extracted a small,